General Hospital spoilers tease that when Frank Valentini finally broke his silence, the revelation hit the General Hospital fanbase like a thunderclap. Drew Cain was not simply another flawed character caught up in the endless turmoil of Port Charles. He had become the very problem dragging the storylines into chaos. For months, viewers had debated whether the tension surrounding Drew was a deliberate storytelling device or simply a symptom of imbalance in the show's writing. Valentini's confirmation settled the matter. It was not random. It was not an accident. Drew was at the core of a creative adjustment, one of the most drastic recalibrations GH had seen in years, and his actions were deliberately pushing the soap into uncharted territory. Drew had already been controversial. From his heavy-handed interference in Willow and Michael's marriage to his manipulations of Wiley and his endless stream of questionable alliances, Drew's trajectory became increasingly toxic. Fans watched him slide from a once sympathetic character into a shadowy, conniving figure who seemed to make every situation worse. Yet Valentini's acknowledgement reframed this descent. It wasn't sloppy writing or poor characterization, it was a calculated dismantling. Drew's spiral was meant to expose cracks not just in his own life, but across the entire canvas of GH. By design, he was becoming the storm around which everyone else would either break apart or rise stronger. The announcement also carried another weight, Drew's departure from Port Charles to Washington, D.C. This was no minor plot twist, no temporary vacation off-screen. Valentini positioned it as a tectonic shift, a decision that would ripple through families, lovers, enemies, and allies alike. For Scout, the move threatened to unravel her entire world. Her father's sudden determination to pull her away from every familiar face set the stage for a custody war unlike any the Quartermaines or Devises had seen. It wasn't simply about a little girl caught between adults, it was about legacy, about memory, about the last fragile connection to Sam McCall that Alexis Davis still clung to with every breath. The drama around Scout's future became the centerpiece of this creative realignment. Valentini's words suggested that this wasn't just about Drew leaving town, it was about igniting a storyline that would consume every corner of GH. Alexis, devastated and furious, was positioned to strike back with a ferocity fans hadn't seen in years. Danny Morgan's loyalty to his sister and defiance against Drew's authoritarian control made him a hero in the making, the young protector stepping into his father Jason's shoes. And Molly Lansing Davis, ever the strategist, was poised to fight for Scout through the legal system, arming herself with reason and evidence to outmaneuver Drew's bullying. Valentini framed Drew's arc as an obsession that bled into the very DNA of the show. Every action Drew took became a trigger for yet another confrontation, another revelation, another betrayal. He had manipulated Willow, blackmailed Portia, lied to Curtis, threatened Stella, and tried to shatter Michael's reputation with false claims of addiction. These weren't random moves, they were brushstrokes in a painting of corruption that turned Drew into a symbol of everything that could go wrong when power and ego spiral unchecked. The adjustment Valentini spoke of was not just narrative, it was thematic. Drew had become the living embodiment of rot, and the only way forward was to excise him, violently if necessary, from the heart of Port Charles. And yet, Valentini left enough ambiguity to keep fans glued to their screens. Would Drew simply vanish into the political corridors of Washington, Scout in tow, leaving Port Charles reeling in his absence? Or would the story veer darker, with Drew meeting a tragic end that would permanently stain the canvas of GH? The rumors swirled relentlessly. Some fans insisted his death was inevitable, a punishment not only for his sins but for the audience's long-held resentment. Others argued that Valentini's fondness for Cameron Matheson might keep him alive, if only to drag out the torment longer. The genius of Valentini's reveal lay in how it reframed Drew's toxicity as intentional fuel. The unease fans felt, the near-universal disdain for Drew, the desperate hope that he would vanish, these reactions weren't a mistake. They were the point. GH had weaponized the audience's hatred, turning Drew into a scapegoat, a lightning rod, and eventually, perhaps, a sacrificial lamb. Soap operas thrive on emotional extremes, and Drew had become the perfect vessel for that extremity. Scout's storyline, meanwhile, was prepared to erupt. Valentini's confirmation positioned her not just as Drew's daughter but as a battleground for grief, justice, and family loyalty. Alexis viewed Scout as the last living remnant of Sam, a child she could not afford to lose. Jason, though emotionally restrained, would not stand by while his niece was ripped away under the guise of Drew's paternal rights. Danny, whose bond with Scout was pure and unbreakable, risked becoming collateral damage in Drew's desperate grasp for control. The child at the center of the storm would, in Valentini's own words, become a symbol of what comes next. The adjustment taking place in GH was not subtle. It was seismic. Valentini's admission that Drew was the problem wasn't just about a character, it was about narrative philosophy. GH was shedding its skin, stepping into a phase where characters would no longer be safe from audience backlash, where fan hatred could be folded into canon and weaponized to shift entire arcs. Drew was the test case. His collapse, his departure, and perhaps even his death would mark the start of this darker, more volatile era of storytelling. As the dust settled, one thing became clear: Valentini had ensured that Drew's shadow would loom long after he left Port Charles. The obsession he embodied, the adjustments his presence forced, and the chaos he sowed would not vanish with his exit. Instead, they would ignite new wars, birth new alliances, and harden old rivalries. Whether Drew walked into DC alive or was carried out in a body bag, the General Hospital universe had been permanently altered. And so the audience waits, torn between fury and fascination. They despise Drew, yet cannot look away from the wreckage he leaves behind. Valentini knew exactly what he was doing when he confirmed Drew's place as the heart of GH's current sickness. For in soaps, the greatest villains are not always the mobsters or the murderers, they are the insiders, the fathers, the lovers, the friends who betray, manipulate, and destroy from within. Drew Cain had become that figure, and his legacy would be nothing less than the reinvention of General Hospital itself. The Davis family has weathered storms before, but never one quite like this. In the wake of Sam McCall's tragic death, grief had bound Alexis, Molly, and Christina together in fragile unity. Yet as time passed and Drew Cain's increasingly erratic behavior began to threaten Scout's stability, that unity splintered. What was once a shared mourning has now transformed into an all-out struggle for control, each woman convinced she alone holds the right to safeguard Sam's legacy through Scout. And what makes this battle so combustible is that none of them are wrong, yet none of them are willing to bend. Alexis Davis carries the heaviest burden of guilt. Losing Sam shattered her, not just as a mother, but as a woman who has watched her family fracture time and again under the weight of bad decisions and tragic fate. For Alexis, Scout is not merely a grandchild. She is the last tangible piece of Sam's soul, a living reminder of what was lost. To see Scout spirited away to Washington, D.C. under Drew's cold authority feels to Alexis like losing Sam all over again. The thought is unbearable. It reawakens old traumas, her failure to protect her daughters in the past, her mistakes as a mother, the countless times her choices left them scarred. Determined not to repeat history, Alexis is prepared to fight Drew, the system, even her own daughters if necessary. If protecting Scout means drawing blood, Alexis will not hesitate. Molly Lansing Davis approaches the crisis with a colder, steadier hand. Unlike her mother, who leads with emotion, Molly leans on intellect and reason. As an attorney, she understands the power of the law, the intricacies of guardianship, and the weaknesses in Drew's case. To her, Scout needs more than love, she needs stability, structure, and someone capable of shielding her from the chaos Drew has created. Molly believes she is the only one with the tools to do that. She is prepared to petition the court, to stand in front of a judge and argue until her voice breaks that Drew's erratic behavior disqualifies him as a father. To Molly, this is not just a family issue but a legal necessity. And while she respects Alexis's fierce devotion and Christina's emotional pleas, she quietly believes neither of them has the discipline to truly protect Scout. Christina Corinthos Davis, however, has never been one to sit quietly on the sidelines. Her passion burns too brightly, her emotions run too hot. To Christina, Scout is not a legal case or a relic of grief, she is family, flesh and blood, and Christina's love for her is visceral. Christina remembers what it was like to grow up caught in the tug-of-war of adults who thought they knew best. She refuses to let Scout become another pawn in a war of egos. Yet, in her determination, Christina risks becoming exactly what she despises. Her fiery temper, her inability to back down, and her long history of impulsive decisions all threaten to undermine her claim. Still, Christina cannot be silenced. She insists that Sam would want her sisters united, but the irony is that her stubbornness may be the very thing that keeps them apart. The tension between the Davis women has begun to crack their once solid foundation. Arguments flare at every turn. Alexis and Molly clash over legal strategy versus emotional justice. Christina accuses both of them of being too wrapped up in their own narratives to see what Scout truly needs: unconditional love. Each woman looks at Scout and sees her own reflection, her own grief, her own guilt, her own vision of what Sam would have wanted. And in that mirror, each one becomes blinded to the other's truths. Meanwhile, Drew looms like a dark cloud over all of it. His obsession with control, his cold dismissal of Alexis's pleas, his ruthless attempts to cut Scout off from her family. These are the sparks that lit the fire. Drew's insistence on moving to D.C., dragging Scout with him, feels less like a parental choice and more like an abduction wrapped in legal authority. His defiance only unites Alexis, Molly, and Christina in one respect: they all agree he is dangerous. But the cruel irony is that their unity fractures the moment they begin to discuss who among them should step in to save Scout. Valentini's confirmation that Drew himself has become the central problem of General Hospital casts every scene in a harsher light. What might have once been dismissed as poor writing or a misstep in character direction is now revealed as intentional design. Drew is not a floundering figure, he is the destabilizer, the contagion meant to infect the show with chaos. His presence doesn't just trouble the characters, it alters the entire narrative fabric of GH. And in this alteration, the Davis family becomes both victim and battleground. As the fight over Scout escalates, old secrets threaten to surface. Alexis, cornered and desperate, begins to recall choices she made in Sam's younger years that she has never confessed. Molly, in her pursuit of legal victory, risks exposing weaknesses in her own relationship with TJ that parallel the instability she criticizes in Drew. Christina, hot-headed and impulsive, finds herself revisiting her darkest days, when she was manipulated and abused, terrified of becoming irrelevant in her own family. These buried wounds are no longer safe. The obsession with Scout tears open scars they have long tried to keep hidden. The real brilliance of Valentini's adjustment is that this battle is not just about a child, it is about legacy. Sam's memory becomes the weapon each Davis woman wields, each claiming to know what Sam would have wanted, each insisting her vision is the truest. But memory is subjective, and grief warps perception. In fighting for Scout, they are also fighting for Sam, for their own sense of worth, for the validation of their identities as mother, sister, aunt, protector. Scout is not just a little girl. She is the stage upon which the Davis family's deepest fractures are laid bare. As this story explodes, Port Charles itself is dragged into the undertow. Jason watches with a stoicism that hides his fury, unwilling to see his niece torn apart by family warfare. Danny, protective of his sister, becomes a catalyst in his own right, stepping into a role far beyond his years. Even Sonny, Christina's father, may be drawn into the fight, his instinct to protect his daughter clashing with his awareness that too much interference could doom her case. The ripple effect expands, until the Davis family's private war threatens to consume the entire community. And through it all, one haunting question persists. Is this truly about Scout's well-being, or is it about the Davis women's need to claim victory over the grief that has haunted them since Sam's death? Valentini's strategy ensures that there is no easy answer, no clear hero or villain. The obsession with Scout is both noble and selfish, both loving and destructive. It is everything a soap opera thrives on: love and loss, loyalty and betrayal, unity and division. The Davis family struggle is more than a custody battle. It is the unraveling of their identity, the surfacing of old demons, and the beginning of a new era for General Hospital. Drew may be the problem that sparked it, but the fire now burns too brightly to be extinguished by his departure alone. Secrets will surface. Alliances will break. And Sam's legacy, embodied in the fragile form of Scout, will determine the future not just of her family, but of the entire canvas of Port Charles. Because in General Hospital, the past never stays buried, the present is never secure, and the future is always one revelation away from collapse. Autumn settles over Port Charles with the hush of a cathedral, and at the Quartermain mansion the air is thick with the kind of silence that only arrives when a dynasty realizes the hourglass has emptied. Monica's passing, whispered to fall somewhere between October and November, doesn't simply close a chapter, it snaps a lineage taut, then lets it sing. In the echo that follows, the will is read, the room holds its breath, and the verdict lands like a gavel on marble. Jason becomes the sole heir. No half measures, no careful divvying of silver and sentiment, everything funnels to the man who never sought the throne, yet now has no choice but to wear it. And with that single line, the ground shifts beneath every Quartermain title and every familiar feud, pushing the story, pushing all of them, further than they ever intended to go. Jason inherits more than assets, he inherits consequences. The estate, the ELQ leverage, the house that feels more like a battlefield than a home, these are instruments of power, but they're also magnets for conflict. Tracy's outrage coils like a spring. Ned counts the angles with a statesman's precision while Brooke Lynn reads the room the way a performer reads a crowd, quickly, shrewdly, hungry for cues. Michael's loyalty splits along old fault lines. Carly recognizes the war before anyone else says its name. And somewhere between the foyer and the rose garden, the old Quartermain ghosts take their places to watch the family do what it always does, wound, heal, repeat. Yet the most fragile ripple from Monica's last act does not break against any of them. It breaks against a child. Because Jason's ascension crystallizes a reality no one can ignore, Scout's future is now the most unstable story in town. On paper, nothing about heirship decides guardianship. In Port Charles, paper burns. Jason's name on Monica's legacy becomes both shield and sword in the tug-of-war over Sam's daughter. For Alexis, the stakes reorder themselves overnight. Monica gone means one less anchor tying Scout to the Quartermain gravity well. But Jason, as sole heir, can recast that gravity entirely. He can create trusts, underwrite educations, reshape conditions with a pen stroke, every practical gesture toward protecting Scout doubling as narrative leverage that draws her closer to the mansion Sam used to walk through with equal parts defiance and grace. Alexis feels the squeeze immediately. Grief gives way to motion. She will not watch Scout get absorbed by a house that eats its young. Molly sees a different map. Courts. Filings. Emergency petitions. She's already drafting an argument as the condolence flowers arrive, itemizing Drew's erratic choices, contrasting them against Alexis's steady presence, and bracing for the way Jason's inheritance will distort the legal optics. Money doesn't equate to fitness. She will say it until a judge believes her. But Port Charles courts have a habit of looking up from the law to the legend, and in legend, a newly minted Quartermain patriarch presents as stability even when the floor is shifting under the parquet. Molly understands this and resents it like oxygen, essential, invisible, impossible to fight without breathing it in. Christina won't wait for any court. If Jason's windfall threatens to make Scout an accessory to legacy management, Christina will do what she always does. Knock on doors, make noise, bend hearts. She remembers the feeling of being a teenager judged by rooms full of powerful men and sharper women, and she refuses to let Scout experience that as anything but seen and loved. Monica's decision, however unintentional, lights every fuse Christina has tried to keep dry. She will appeal to Jason's protector's heart, to the part of him that remembers Sam's laugh and her stubborn, impossible courage. She will stand on the queue steps if she has to and say the quiet parts out loud. When love is not given a seat at the table, Christina brings a chair. Meanwhile, Drew reads the tea leaves and sees only exit signs. DC was always his answer, but now it becomes his alibi, distance as destiny. He can frame the move as opportunity, as safety, as a fresh start where Quartermain's shadows can't find Scout's light. Yet Monica's last bequest detonates that fiction. Leaving now looks less like leadership and more like flight, and every mile he tries to put between Scout and Port Charles becomes evidence that he's running from a fight he can't control. The more he insists, the more Scout becomes a prize in the window instead of a girl in a home. And that is where the town draws the line. Jason, who did not ask for any crown, understands the paradox immediately. If he exerts the power Monica's will confers, he confirms everyone's worst fear. That he will define Scout's path with the same blunt force he uses to protect the people he loves. If he refuses the power, he risks abandoning a child at the precise moment when a family center wobbles. He is a man who solves problems by shouldering them. Monica knew that. Perhaps that's why she made the choice she did, to entrust the house to the person least likely to use it as a weapon. But trust is not an antidote to optics, and optics are the private currency of Port Charles. The practical machinery begins to whir, probate timetables, boardroom whispers at ELQ, the slow, ceremonial unsealing of letters Monica left behind. Each envelope holds a memory, each memory pulls another thread. Someone finds Sam's photograph on a mahogany desk and leaves it there on purpose. Someone else moves it to a side table to keep from breaking. There is talk of a scholarship in Monica's name, of a pediatric wing plaque polished until you can see your face in it. Good, decent acts. Yet the narrative they feed is clear, the Quartermain orbit just got stronger, and Scout is caught in its pull. For Alexis, that pull feels like history repeating as tragedy. She has already begun to dream in scenes, Scout at a breakfast table too long for conversation, the house staff learning her preferred cereal, Jason's quiet shadow stretching across her childhood like afternoon light that never quite fades. None of this is malicious in the dream, it is simply inevitable, the way families with power absorb pain by assigning it a room and calling it legacy. Alexis wakes up furious because inevitability is a story written by people who benefit from it. She does not. Molly's case sharpened by Monica's timing, Christina's heart emboldened by the same, and Jason's steady hands trying to keep every delicate piece from hitting the floor. This is the geometry of the fall. The town gathers itself around the spectacle because that is what Port Charles does. It watches, it picks sides, it pretends neutrality while gossip works the seams. Sonny keeps his distance until he can't. Carly counsels quiet and braces for noise. Ned oscillates between indignation and a grudging relief that at least the house is in hands he can predict. Tracy plans. Tracy always plans. And then come the secrets, the kind that live in footnotes of wills and in the margins of old letters. Monica has always been the physician who treated the symptom and the cause. What if she left a trust in Scout's name that bypasses the custody war entirely but binds the girl to a certain geography, a certain school, a certain notion of home? What if she named guardians of intent rather than guardians of law, articulating the life she wanted Scout to have without naming the person to provide it? In soap arithmetic, ambiguity multiplied by money equals conflict to the power of 10. Every clause becomes a cliffhanger. Every comma, a choice. By the time the leaves are copper, the house is a map of loyalties. The future of Scout, always fragile, always precious, now becomes the weather vane for the entire show. Which way she turns is which way Port Charles will lean. If she stays, it means legacy won. If she goes, it means love found a way to outrun gravity. Jason's inheritance doesn't settle the matter, it animates it. It proves exactly what everyone feels in their bones. Monica's love was absolute, but the world she left behind is not. It is unstable, alive, persuasive, dangerous. It wants things. And it is very, very good at getting them. So the story goes farther than anyone thought it would. The fall becomes not just a season but a sentence, the period at the end of Monica's long, elegant chapter and the capital letter at the start of Scout's. Jason stands at the hinge between the two, aware that every step he takes will either calm the town or throw it into a new orbit. The truth is simple and unbearable. Being the sole heir doesn't make him the hero. It makes him the axis. And an axis does not choose who spins, it merely holds while the world turns. In that turning, the Davis women refuse to release their grip. Alexis argues. Molly files. Christina loves out loud. Drew threatens distance and discovers that distance is not a plan, it's a verdict. And Port Charles, ever the chorus, leans forward to witness whether legacy can be kind, whether power can be merciful, whether a child can be protected not by possession but by promise. Monica believed in promises. She stitched them into this family until her last day. Now the promise is Scout's name, carried on autumn air, asking the only question that matters. Where is home when the house itself is a storm?